Okay, I think it's done. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ursula and Corrado, and those behind the scenes for continuing to help support and grow this community. It's fantastic that there are people like yourselves who volunteer their times to do something where we can create forums for conversation and discovery and debates to help out ourselves as individuals and the organizations that we support. So I really appreciate it, and all the best for next year. It's going to be another interesting year. And also thank you for giving me this platform on a number of occasions. It's really quite heartwarming to know that I must be saying a few things which are good and shareable. So thank you so much. So for those who don't know me, my name is Dean Latchana. I've got one or two opening slides to describe who I am. In fact, what I'll do now, I'm just going to share my screen and we can kick off. So let's see. Okay, can people see a grey slide with some white text? Yes, thank you, Corrado. Seeing some thumbs up here. So yeah, so this talk is a hard stop at 7:30 UK time. And this talk is going to be examining a phenomenon that I'm aware of experience. I've helped clients be able to recognize this phenomenon and actually exploit it to their advantage. And also this is backed up by not only experience and anecdotes, it's also backed up by theory. And there's going to be some tie-ins with complexity thinking and some academics and some other work. So I know Corrado, before we start the recording, spoke about Cynefin as well. I won't be referring to Cynefin directly, but those who know about complexity thinking in Cynefin may recognize some degrees of leadership and complexity thinking in a fast changing world. No need to take any screen grabs, because if you hit this URL, you'll be able to get to the web page, which has got details of this talk and also an embedded deck as well that you can go through as well and download if you want. So let's move on to the next slide. So this next slide is talking about myself. So I've been fortunate enough to work for a number of different household organizations and global brands. This has allowed me to develop some stories of success and failure. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to bring some of this to bear during this talk. And also, for those who don't know, I'm also the founder and editor of a non-profit, print-only monthly publication called The Agilist, which is, people subscribe to it for a few euros, pounds, or dollars each month, and they receive it in the post every month. In fact, I've got I'm not sure if you can see my camera but I've got a copy of it here. This is what it looks like. So if you ever want to receive a digest of the best of thinking in that lean agile space, then this is something that you can have a look at as well. Feel free to subscribe to it. So let's move on to what we want to talk about today. And there's going to be opportunities, and this is in fact an opportunity where you guys can unmute yourself and share your thinking. So let's just pause and reflect on this slide here, and I'll welcome people's thoughts about what this means to you, or perhaps the organizations that you're supporting. So I'll just read it out, and then we'll just pause and reflect, and then we can unmute ourselves. So this is a quote from Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric about 20 years ago. And he was able to turn around the organization during his tenure. So he said that if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. So let's just pause and reflect on what this means, and feel free to unmute yourself just to share something that you're thinking that you have on your mind. So yeah, I just welcome any thoughts on this before we move on.
Just Dean, on the topic of change, it's usually the typical go-to fact that you see on any slide deck since 30 years about the necessity for internal changes, about the external change, but the perception of the rate of change also depends very much on what is in the scope of the institution that looks for evaluating this change. So that's also a bias slash filter that organizations evaluation of their own situations let's say it mitigates the perception of the rate of change, and also not just the scope but also the dimensions through which or at which these organizations look at. Let's say you have in your blind spot certain markets or certain competitors or certain trends or technologies. You will think you're doing very well in terms of perception of rate of change. On the other hand, you might also have it too wide of a scope and think, hey, you've been overtaken and invest in the wrong things and destroy the resources of your organization, of your people, of your company onto the wrong things. So, my thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. That's fantastic thoughts and a fantastic contribution, and I identify with what you're saying. I guess to me, what comes to mind is there may be a difference between reality and perception. They may have an internal perception of the market they're in and how it's changing, but that could be quite different to reality. And as you say, there could also be a rate of change which is inappropriate, and it may actually be too fast. There may be too much innovation. But yeah, so I think I've understood what you said and I identify with it. Absolutely. And anybody else care to unmute themselves and just share some thoughts they have in their mind based on this quote?
Well, as a sportsman, I would say that this sentence reminds me how you can use a treadmill. If the band where you are running on is too fast, the pace is not sustainable at all. And so actually the effect is that you are falling down. It is the end of the practice. Just to share my thought.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. And I never knew, Corrado, you're a bit of a sportsman. That's good to know as well. We have somebody else who's unmuted themselves. Please go ahead.
Yeah, for me, just the thing that was sparked off Mara's comment. So the rate of change on the inside for me is, I think, closely correlated to the perception of the rate of change on the outside, because that is more of a conscious choice to effect change so that you adapt and maintain a stable relationship to your environment. But if the rate of change on the outside is higher than that, then it means that your reality does not match your perception, and that gap will grow over time, which means that at some point you become not relevant anymore. I don't want to say irrelevant, but certainly if you're a organization selling something, what you have to offer no longer matches what your marketplace is trying to buy. So I was just the subject of perception really kind of hit me, because then I started equating the internal view of internal change as representing the perception of change on the external. Hadn't really thought about that one until just now, but there might be some more there. Don't know yet.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. That's really good contribution. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on, but we may come back to this towards the end. Just admitted one more person. Okay, so let's just move on. So how can organizations create the ability to rapidly respond to change? I think in most parts, particularly incumbent organizations, tend to have a tendency to be able to consolidate around existing successes. But the market's moving on. There could be occurrences, certainly we've seen this year, occurrences where there may not be fine-tuned or aligned to an ability to be able to innovate and exploit new emergent opportunities or respond to threats. So how can organizations create the ability to rapidly respond to change? We're going to be returning to this question a few times during the time we have together this evening. So a bit of background first of all. So I'm going to be describing 3 sources of pressure for large incumbent organizations that have had success for many, many decades. And I should imagine the majority of us have some involvement with such organizations. So I've identified 3 buckets here. And it's the last bucket which I'd like to spend the most time on this evening. But the first one is having a look at market disruption. There are fickle customers who quite often have emergent and unarticulated needs. We don't really know what those needs truly are until we actually present something to them, or offer something in the market, or get something into their hands. There are new entrants probing the market all the time. There are economic factors as to why that's happening. Interest rates are low. Investors are looking to back VCs. VCs are looking to pump money into lots of disruptive organizations, many of which fail, but some of them do stick, and they are challenges to the business models of existing organizations. Another set of challenges, another source of pressure, let's describe it as, is increased uncertainty, regulatory change. At this very moment, there are discussions between the UK and the EU about what the hell's going to happen in only a short few weeks' time. Economic, political uncertainty, global trade wars, fluctuating currencies, increased security risks. We're hearing about malicious attacks on digital infrastructure every single day. And as we've grown to experience, there are public health crises. These are black swan events that we didn't anticipate before, such as COVID. So this is another source of pressure, but the source of pressure that I'd like to talk about most this evening is internal complexity. And this can be described as, or this could be the result of organizations, particularly ones that have been successful for many, many decades, consolidating around particular processes, expectations, ways of doing things, a certain culture which is built around Taylorism, a mindset which is very much around predict and control in the future. But we cannot predict the future as much as we may perceive we can. And we certainly cannot control it as much as we perhaps had done in the past. There's also internal capabilities quite often are too glacial to respond to the change in increasing clock cycle of the changing landscape in which these organizations are trying to survive and thrive in. And there's another type of internal complexity as well, is that at the individual level, as individuals, we have a different appetite for growth and uncertainty and ambiguity. And so we need to be sensitive to the individual needs of the colleagues that we're working with. So that's just touching on the internal complexities. And this is something that we're going to open up and explore this evening. So what are the realities? Why is there internal complexities? And to do that, I'd like to just touch on three particular areas which we could describe as impediments to change. So one is alignment not always being the problem, pattern entrainment, and also this dynamic between operationalism and entrepreneurialism. The first one I'd like to have a look at is pattern entrainment. So pattern entrainment is an occurrence which happens at an individual level and also at an organizational level, where the individual organization develops a deep expertise in a certain success. So this could be a product or service. It could be some offering to the market from an organization point of view. From an individual point of view, it could be something that we've learned about at the start of our career. The example here is the black cab operators in London. The black cab operators have got to pass a test before they qualify to be able to operate a black cab, called the knowledge. And the knowledge is a test where they've got to be able to recite routes around London as part of their test to know whether they can become a black cab operator. And they have an extraordinary ability to do this. What's quite interesting is there was a study around 25 years ago, before the Canary Wharf business district got developed in the east of London. And these black cab operators were able to pathfind around the previous road network really, really well. But then as the business district got developed, the network, the way to path around that new business district was different. And what's really surprising and intriguing is those black cab operators found it harder to relearn those new paths more than a regular driver who were less familiar with the existing or the previous road network around this district. So they became pattern trained in the previous road layout, and they found it even harder to unlearn and relearn the new network. And this is actually mapped in neurologically, so the hippocampus actually changes shape depending on the neural pathways which are developed. And it's very, very hard to unlearn those things. And so this is just an example of how individuals and organizations, they conserve energy by finding success, but as success becomes less and less relevant, then we find it very, very hard individually or organizationally to be able to learn something new. We have pattern entrainment on previous success. Something else that I'd like to talk about in terms of impediments to change is this dynamic between operationalism and entrepreneurialism. So I'm going to build this up bit by bit. So if we think about the entrepreneurial system, and we can also think about the idea of an ambidextrous organization. So on one hand, an organization has to have a great deal of competency and strength in the entrepreneurial system. Incidentally, that doesn't really exist in incumbent organizations. But the entrepreneurial system, to be successful, it has characteristics of dealing with complexity, uncertainty, rapid change. To be successful here, we need to emphasize innovation, so exploring, learning, growth, adapting and killing ideas or strategies which aren't working to create that innovation. The other side of an ambidextrous organization is continuing to have success with existing products, services, or market offerings. So this is characterized by a system which is fairly familiar, routine, predictable, known. We're working within narrow margins of error, where the entrepreneurial system, there's a wider appetite and appropriateness for error. We emphasize performance on revenue, cash in the till, continuous improvement, and just building upon this dynamic or these differences between entrepreneurial and the operational system. If we think about, I'm looking in the top left-hand corner here, these success tends to be hard to measure in the traditional sense. It involves end-to-end collaboration. But if you think about incumbent organizations, they're organizationally designed in silos, which doesn't always accommodate end-to-end collaboration. Looking on the right side now, oh, sorry, excuse me. I need to go back into present mode. Corrado, you can cut this out of the video at the end. Okay.
No, I will not do that.
You're not going to do that. You're going to include the mistakes. Good for you. Okay, so hopefully you're still seeing a screen share. So on the right-hand side, these things tend to be easy to measure. So as I mentioned before, it could be cash in the till, operational excellence, market growth. These organizations have a pattern to be able to measure those things quite easily. And work can be divided up into silos. So what happens in established organizations is the operational system dominates the entrepreneurial system and stifles that system from emerging and taking root. And I've witnessed this directly of my own personal experience. So again, how can we overcome this? How can we overcome this? So we're going to answer that this evening. So we need to be able to flip this phenomenon of the operational system stifling the emergence of the entrepreneurial system to one where the entrepreneurial system is enabling the operational system to adapt to a fast changing world, to respond to that quote from Jack Welch. Okay, the final thing around impediments to change is one around alignment not always being the problem. Okay, so this is a study from Harvard Business Review. And in fact, that at the end of this slide deck, I've got references to all this material here. So if you want to read up about this a bit more, then you can look at those references. And this is one of those references I'm going to talk about now. So there's a myth that execution, to deliver execution, we need to have more alignment within our organizations. That's not always the case. So what tends to happen, we have some top level strategy that we've got to be able to implement in some period of time, say a few years or 18 months or 12 months. And what tends to happen in an organization, that gets broken up and cascaded as objectives down the organization. The latest fashion is to do this with objectives and key results, or OKRs. And to improve execution, we've got to get even tighter by managing these objectives. Any failure in execution is blamed on a breakdown in alignment, which for many situations is a misattribution. It's an attribution error. It's not always alignment, which is the fault of a failure in execution. What tends to happen is we fall into an alignment trap where we need ever increasing performance metrics. We need to tie OKRs to performance and bonuses, which is a bit of a no-no. We also need to attend more steering committees. We need to have more PMO controls and governance. And this is just spiraling into an alignment trap. What's interesting is this Harvard Business Review report had a look at, Corrado, there's just someone waiting to enter the room, by the way. So this Harvard Business Review report did a study, and they asked individuals, how much could you trust your boss to get something done? And how much could you trust your direct reports to get something done? And it was actually quite high. 84% of individuals said they could trust their boss to get something done and their direct reports to get something done. So this is vertical alignment in an organization. There's quite a lot of trust that something will get delivered. How much could you rely on those individuals? And then the next question, again, how much could you rely on these individuals? Asked, how much could you rely on people in different departments and different business units? That dropped down to less than 60% and not much more than how much an individual could trust external suppliers or partners. So what this Harvard Business Review report concluded is that to get execution, particularly when it comes to innovation, we shouldn't look to improve vertical alignment all the time. We've got to look for opportunities where we can strike up conversations and collaborations with business units horizontally across the organization. And so this is the third challenge that we've got to be able to overcome. So I'm going to be sharing some experiences and some studies which allows these successes to be more likely to occur. Okay, so again, let's ask the question, how can our clients and the organizations we work for create the ability to rapidly respond to change? So what we need to do, we need to take a leaf out of Agenda Shift's book. For those who know Agenda Shift, it's a framework for allowing change to occur in large organizations. And so I'm just taking this notion of moving from obstacles to outcomes. So an approach for closing this gap between those who are entrepreneurial and those who are operational. So we've had a look at 3 of the challenges, and what I'd like to do is have a look at 3 examples of how we can close that gap between the entrepreneurs and the operators. One is to handpick entrepreneurs from across the organization. One is to organize for innovation. And thirdly is to actually integrate those entrepreneurs with those on the operational side, because on their own, entrepreneurs can only get so much done. They actually need to get access and collaborate with those on the operational side. The first one we're going to have a look at is handpicking the entrepreneurs. So I'm going to be using some experience I've got of where we found success in this one. But before we do, a bit of an interlude into the work of a psychologist, an occupational psychologist, Edgar Schein. Some of you may be familiar with his work. He talks about a dynamic between learning anxiety and survival anxiety. And we each as individuals have a tendency to exhibit these anxieties. And what he says is that we need to be able to reduce the learning anxiety, not increase the survival anxiety. So what tends to happen in organizations that I've experienced is that to encourage change, a leader may describe their organization as a burning platform. And that, to me, that I'm going to increase my survival anxiety. And that's going to make me fearful. And there's a tendency for me to create a strong resistance to learning, because psychologically, I'm being very fearful. I might lose my job. My colleagues might lose my job. So what we've got to do is not be aware of survival anxiety, but not necessarily increase it. So we shouldn't do what's described on the right-hand side here. Instead, leaders should decrease learning anxiety by doing some of the following: by conveying the business reality that we need to look for opportunities for change. So that's giving clarity. We need to provide good training, good technical competency for new skills or capabilities to allow the organization to pivot to a new place, a new vision. So this is increasing competency. We also need to create a network of coaching and supporting. And this allows individuals to be able to share their experiences, their opportunities for growth, and switch from perhaps a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And this happens at a personal level with professional coaching. And this can happen at every layer of the organization. What this does, this creates lower learning anxiety, because we're given a safe space for these individuals to show bravery, raising my hand up, saying, I don't know about this, I'm fearful, I fear that my previous set of skills and capabilities are being undermined. Can you help me learn something new, something different, a new capability, something else I can offer my colleagues and my organization? So Eggershine says, don't increase survival anxiety, look for opportunities to reduce learning anxiety. And that dynamic allows people to switch to a growth mindset. Okay. So let's move on from that interlude and think about the handpicking those entrepreneurs. And these entrepreneurs tend to have a growth mindset. What I'd like to do now is pick up on some work of David Marquette, who wrote the fantastic book, Turn the Ship Around. And you guys may have observed this as well yourselves, is if we think about organizations, large incumbent organizations, which have been around for many decades, they tend to settle on an organizational design which can be seen as a pyramid, where at the bottom, if you can see in my mouse, we have individuals and teams at the bottom who happen to be closest to the customer, closest to the problem or opportunity. And at the top of the organization, we have the leadership team at the apex of the organization. And what tends to happen in such organizations is that there could be some information held by the individuals and teams at the bottom of the organization. And that information is passed up to the apex of the organization for a decision to occur. And that decision is then cascaded back down again for all the different layers of management for the individuals and teams at the bottom to finally execute. Let's suppose that takes 6 weeks to occur, typically. If an organization wants to outlearn and outcompete against the competition, 6 weeks is just not going to cut it in a fast-moving market. So what David Marquette says is, rather than push information up to authority, look for opportunities where we can push authority down to where the information exists, to those teams and individuals at the bottom. What that does is that reduces the clock cycle of decision-making, and that allows us, in a controlled, safe to learn environment, opportunities where teams and individuals can say, okay, we've tried this, didn't work, but how about we try this new innovation or improvement to an existing product or service? And to do that, we've got to handpick entrepreneurs who have the appetite and find it appropriate to work in this manner. And also the leaders to support them to create a safe place for learning. Something else that David Marquette speaks about, which ties into this, is the dynamic between the amount of control an individual has and the degree of competency and clarity. If an individual or a team has a high degree of technical competency and they understand the mission, so they're more towards the right, we should be able to afford them a great deal of control. So we need to find entrepreneurs, handpick those entrepreneurs from across the business, co-locate them, give them a problem which they're fired up about, make sure they have clarity of what the mission is that we're trying to accomplish, give them technical competencies and the support system from the leadership team, and give them the control to actually execute and bring something back, brings back some insights, some learning for us to be able to say, okay, now we know this, what can we do in the next month or the next 2 weeks? And some of the characteristics of these individuals that we need to handpick and bring together ties into some thinking from Simon Wardley, famous for Wardley mapping. So these individuals can deal with rare information. They can see weak signals in the noise. They can deal with things which have poor understanding. They can deal with ambiguity. They can live in a space of novelty and emergence. They are happy with, I'm not sure if I'll call it happy with, but they are happy with failure, or they can stomach things which have failed in a way which they perhaps didn't anticipate. They can experiment with leadership support, and they can deal with uncertainty. So we need to identify these individuals, and I've seen success of this with various different clients where we've designed this in and had success. Okay, so this is handpicking in entrepreneurs. The next thing to close that gap between entrepreneurialism and operationalism is one around organizing for innovation. And this is where there's going to be a little bit of participation from yourselves. And Corrado, I'm not sure if you're able to help out here. So what we're looking to do is get some answers from everybody, and everybody, if you could put your answers into the chat, and I'll facilitate this. So we'll go step by step, and perhaps Corrado, at the right stage, you can just call out what answers people are giving. I'll be grateful. Okay, so
I'm on it.
Smashing, thank you. So what I'm going to be doing, this is also another study from Harvard Business Review, where they examined, they looked at many different organizations, dozens of different business units, and each business unit was categorized into 4 different organizational designs. And the question I'm going to be asking you guys stage by stage is, which organization design do you believe were successful with breakthrough innovation? So this is something which is revolutionary for the organization, which could help them respond to change. So the first design, organizational design, is a functional design where existing teams, so here, for example, there could be a manufacturing team, there could be a sales team, there could be an R&D team. These teams are already busy doing operational things. And up here, we have a management team here as well. So have a think to yourselves about what percentage of organizations designed like this who were successful at making breakthrough innovations, where these operational teams are also asked to do innovation. So they're busy doing the operational stuff, but they're being also asked to create breakthrough innovation in an existing management structure. So feel free to unmute yourself if you've got any clarifying questions. But what I'd like you guys to do in the chat window is write down the percentage of of companies of this organization design were successful at breakthrough innovation.
Sorry, Dean, is a real case, or what is, in our opinion, the right percentage that we should?
Yeah, so this is a study of dozens of different organizations, and they've actually come up with a percentage. So I'd like you guys to guess at what percentage of this organization design was successful at breakthrough innovation. Is that clear? So have a go in the chat window, and perhaps we'll wait like 10, 15 seconds, and then Corrado, if you could call out some percent.
20, 10, 40%. We have less than 5, maybe 5, 10%.
Okay.
10. Well, again, sorry, Dean, just another question from me. This was a successful integration.
There was this organization design of these companies which were successful at achieving breakthrough innovation.
Okay, so it's a company.
It's a company, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, there is a 30%, and then I type 80%.
Okay. Okay. So let's have a look. Let's reveal the answer. Before that, I want to get a percentage for this organizational design. So this is a cross-functional team. So this is innovation has been achieved again with teams. It's trying to be achieved with teams who are already busy doing operational work, but they're trying to succeed outside of the existing management hierarchy. So the difference between the first one and the second one is that the first one, that there was management involved in supporting the teams to be operational, but also innovative. The one on the right-hand side is the same, but there was no management support for these existing teams being innovative. So let's get some answers on this one, and then afterwards I'll reveal the true percentage. So in the chat window, let's get some percentages, and Corrado, perhaps you can read them out as they come through.
90%, 79.56%. Then we have a 40%, 75%. However, it's 88%. Then Zach, 30%.
Okay.
However, the numbers are absolutely double than the previous one.
Okay, roughly. Okay, I'm going to reveal it now. So 25% of organizations with a functional design were successful at breakthrough innovation. The ones which had cross-functional teams, so these are existing teams who are doing operational work and innovative work, but without the management hierarchy to support them, 0% were successful. So it's even less than the first one. Okay, I'm going to show you the third organizational design. I'm going to get you guys to guess again. So this one here is one where there are totally unsupported teams. So this was like a different emerging business trying to create breakthrough innovation, separate from the existing operational teams and separate from the management hierarchy. So they're on their own. A bit like a skunk works, just out there in a different building or a different part of the world. So in the chat window, please have write down the percentage of this organizational design which you believe were successful at breakthrough innovation. So totally unsupported, they're on their own.
Yeah, 40, 50, 75, 25, 50, 70, 15. I think the numbers can be comparable to the second set that we have.
Okay, thank you. Answers are 0% were successful in this study. Who was closest to zero, Corrado?
No one.
No one. Who was the lowest?
The lowest is 25%.
Okay, well done, that person.
Sorry, we have 15%. 15%.
Okay. All right, the last one. By the way, I'm hearing a bit of echo on the line, Corrado. I'm not sure if you need to mute yourself at the moment. Okay, so the last one is one where there was an ambidextrous organization. So we had the existing business doing the operational stuff, maintaining and improving the existing products and services and market offerings. And then we have the emergent business who are doing stuff which is entrepreneurial. They're doing innovation work. They're also supported by the existing management structure. Okay, this allows the emerging business to find their own culture and processes and ways of working So my question to you guys, my final question to you guys is, of the organizations that had this organizational design, what percentage were successful at breakthrough innovation?
Sorry, 50, 50, 80, 50. Then we have another 30%, 60%. As an average, it's an higher one,
Yeah.
75%.
Okay, I shall reveal the answer. 90% was successful with this organizational design. This surprised me when I first learned about this study, but on reflection, it made sense to me. Perhaps, Corrado, we could allow a few people to unmute themselves just to share their thinking.
Yeah,
yeah,
you can by yourself. Yeah,
I'm also impressed. I was always thought, like make them independent, get them out of the system, second operating system, like completely away with own budget and get rid of any structure over them. So I'm also surprised.
Yeah,
I thought unsupported teams.
Design.
Yeah.
I was surprised as well. Why do you think that is? Why do you think unsupported teams were less successful than the design where teams were supported by the existing management hierarchy? Any ideas?
We're still in some sort of existing legacy structure. So I very much assume some little details, osmotic communication, osmotic information, small tiny budget for certain tooling. Yeah, we can never close the eyes to legacy. Probably in a startup this couldn't happen, I assume. But in existing businesses, we see here existing business, existing companies. I have a background from Ericsson, like a 150 years old company. There is always legacy, always strikes back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts from other people? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Are they just like freeloading maybe?
Say again?
They're just like building on the success of the existing business. So,
In what way?
just being cynical. But yeah, I don't know, like in the sense that like if the business is already existing, the existing business is doing well. So they've got the right people, they're just experimenting in something else. Therefore, the emerging business would also be able to build upon that success, just in a slightly different tangent. Or alternatively, it's like it gives you that optionality. So if it like there's something wrong in the emerging business, the existing business can come in and help. If there's something like fledgling in the existing business, they could use the emerging business.
Yeah, I like that thinking. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have a thought?
I don't know. I think the bit that's I'm struggling to reconcile is the word breakthrough in your description of it, because I normally associate innovation with, I don't necessarily mean increment, but certainly in the same domain, but some kind of invention that increases the effectiveness, improve something about an existing thing already. You can innovate on that and build it something that's derivative. So for me, breakthrough sounds like, for it to be genuinely different, there might have to be enough decoupling from the history and legacy, which is why I was surprised by the skunk works giving you 0. But maybe that's just how I was interpreting the word breakthrough with innovation. And maybe I don't know, but I can certainly understand and rationalize the guided structure showing boundaries, vision, at least having some kind of subset of possible inventions, futures you could be looking at as an emergent business. I think could mean that you end up focusing more on the domains that are relevant for this business rather than absolutely anything. Whereas if you have zero management support, you might invent a thing which has nothing to do with your existing organization. So the range that you're looking at is infinitely broader, which might mean that you just spend less time with luck coming up with an accidental discovery. I don't know. I'm not quite sure. I think I need to read this before I have an opinion, to be honest. But that's the kind of thinking that's going on in my head.
Yeah, yeah. And there are references to this at the end. So yeah, do feel free to have a look. The example I have in my mind is Kodak, who in the late 70s, well, throughout their history, they became pattern trained, again, using that phrase again, on the camera and print industry. They dominated the market and they found it very, very hard to unlearn and relearn on new opportunities. But they did have a innovation unit, and they were the first to develop a production prototype of a digital camera, I think in the late 70s or early 80s. But they didn't really have, they were separate from the management hierarchy, and the management weren't really, didn't really find it appropriate to have the appetite to actually exploit that innovation because it would actually cannibalize they were fearful it would cannibalize their existing business model. So I think that's one example where just a totally separate business, this one here, the emergent business, may fail. And we should also think about Bell Labs, who in the 60s and 70s innovated things like the graphical user interface. I think it was a Hewlett Packard, who were the parent company. They never exploited it because they were no, it was Xerox. It was Xerox.
No, it's Palo Alto. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I agree with that. But for me, I think also the Kodak example is really interesting because that skunkworks came up with the digital camera. They actually came up with a far superior product, but the business did not see the value in it. So again, were they successful? Okay, they weren't successful as a business, etc., but they did come up with a more innovative product than something that is supported by management. So I guess it kind of depends maybe on how you define successful. As in, is it the concept itself or the commercialization of said concept? That maybe there's some thing there, a combination of those two, which is important for the HBR paper. At least maybe that's what they were picking on.
Yeah. What I believe from the paper, it's actually breakthrough innovation, which is actually commercially successful, or it was it found feet in the market, or at least it was testing the market to know whether this is actually can become a going concern.
And I reckon with that model, then without management buy-in, it'll never make it past the ideas board. So there's the kind of taking the operationalize the idea. I think so. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Zach. I'm going to move on now because we've got about half an hour left. So we've spoken about handpicking entrepreneurs. We spoke about organizing for innovation. The last one I want to speak about is this notion of integrating with the operational system. Because we just learned the innovators, entrepreneurs cannot really survive on their own as a separate entity. So how can we create success by integrating it with the operational side? Before doing that, I'm going to be introducing you guys to something called social capital, but before doing that, I just want to introduce you to something that we may know of already called human capital. And this tends to be the interest and the specialism of HR, human resources. And what I'm thinking is that human capital is all very well, but I think there's an opportunity to look at social capital because there's actually bringing disparate, separate, coherent groups of people together to cross those silos to create innovation and breakthrough success. But first of all, let's just have a look at human capital. And this is the specialism of HR. What that tends to look at is things like leadership competency models, leadership development programs, employee engagements and surveys that we tend to do every kind of 6 months or so, talent management, talent acquisition, talent development, personal performance plans, all this kind of stuff, which is all well and good and has success. But I think there's a phenomenon called social capital that we also need to look at, and it's an emerging field that we should look into and consider, I believe. And what social capital talks about is the natural way in which humans and individuals group together and form bands or groups of people, which is illustrated on the right-hand side. These groups of people they're highly coherent, and there's a great deal of trust and networking which happens in these teams of, say, no more than 9 people, or let's say 12 people. Okay, so there's group cohesion. It talks about how connected an individual is within a group. There's a great deal of redundancy within that group there. But what tends to happen in here is there's quick information sharing. There's a high degree of trust within these groups, within these clusters, but not really across those clusters. So let's suppose this is an entrepreneurial cluster and this is an operational cluster. Quite naturally, it's very human of these individuals to have a strong connection and trust to be built up in their own coherent structures, but less so between these coherent structures. So what we need to do is to consider something called social capital. And what social capital talks about is there are individuals, very special individuals, who are able to converse in more than one cluster. So they're able to converse well with individuals who are in the entrepreneurial cluster and those in the operational cluster. Not only are they able to converse with those two clusters, they're able to bring those two clusters together to create a safe space where these two different groups can challenge each other. They can have divergent and convergent thinking on a new idea, which then becomes operationalized if it's successful. So these people of high social capital are able to bridge, they're able to connect these between those clusters. They act as brokers. These are trusted individuals who are able to bring conversations together between clusters who tend to be quite separate. And so if we think about the entrepreneurial cluster who have this semblance of an idea which may be successful, we need to be able to operationalize it. They've been able to build it, they've been able to nail it, they now need to scale it, and they cannot scale it at all on their own because they don't have access to the capital, don't have access to suppliers, don't have access to the experience of those operators. But the challenge is the operators and the entrepreneurs have different kind of pressures, and there's tension between the two. Remember, I spoke about how the operational system can stifle the emergence of innovation on the entrepreneurial side. This happens. What we need to do is to identify those people of high social capital to bring those two different groups together to create what the academic Mary Albean talks about as an adaptive space, where those on the innovation side who are pushing for novelty and those on the operational side who are pushing for maintaining and improving existing results to come together and create some kind of future viable state in which some success, once it's been built and it's been nailed, we now need to scale it. We need to be able to do that with the operational system. So what we need to do is create an environment where those entrepreneurs actually enable adaptability on the operational side. And I'll give you a real example of that in a moment. So this is where emergence can occur. So from the left-hand side, those innovators are finding those little clues, those little ideas where customers and stakeholders are saying, I like that, can have more of that. And then we now have a scaling problem. Those innovators have originally found some problem solution fit. We now need to move into what could be described as the product market. If we found a product, let's see if we can find an ever-increasing market opportunity to scale it. And we need those operators to do that. And this happens in the operational space. So again, those entrepreneurs are enabling the adaptability of the operators to be able to navigate a fast moving market of new products and services. So thinking about this and the experiences that I've had and what academics like Mary Orbean talks about is that I'm realizing that innovation isn't so much a technical phenomenon. It's a social phenomenon. It's not necessarily only about getting the most out of blockchains or DevOps tools or new emerging technologies. That's all well and good, but for those innovators to be able to find success for the operators, it's very much a social phenomenon. And to scale, innovators must rely on those operational people. So Mary Orbean talks about some practices and principles to allow this to occur. So one is liberator structures. Some people on the call may be familiar with liberator structures. It's a set of large group facilitation techniques which allows a divergent and convergent thinking to occur, to allow there to be to set a forum where operators, let's say, and entrepreneurs can come together to explore something in a way in which they can have perhaps in a professional sense disagreement, but then agreement on the convergent. Okay, now we know this, where can we be successful? Another principle is one where we start small and we think big and learn fast. So rather than trying to change and revolutionize a whole organization, we just bring two disparate clusters together with the support of those individuals with high social capital, bring those together to run some rapid experiments. Another practice is that if we find ourselves on the innovation side and we have this idea that we believe has potential for growth, we can actually find a friend on the operational side who may have an appetite and find it appropriate to then actually bring that to their other colleagues on the operational side to see if we can run some rapid experiments. And the final principle that Mary Orbean talks about is actually engaging the tension. There's naturally going to be tension and disagreement between the operational side and the entrepreneurial side, but we've actually got to embrace that conflict in a professional sense, where if we think about design thinking, where we have lots of divergent thinking, but then we need to find agreement where we can converge, we can connect on a particular idea, which we can actually take to market and try and scale it. And this happens in what Mary Orbean talks about as an adaptive space, where we bring those two different parties together to see if we can land on something which we think we can scale. So I want to try and bring this to life with a real example. And this is an example from a retailer that I supported a number of years ago. And we were looking for innovations within the physical store environment. And we had these customer service desks, and we had these customer service colleagues behind those desks not being very proactive. And what we decided to do was to consider what happened if we closed down those customer service desks and provide coaching and support to allow those customer service colleagues to be able to go out and greet customers to see if customers needed help, actually walk around the front of the store, be available in different situations, in different locations, and not just be trapped behind that customer service desk. And what we decided to do was to run this quite radical experiment of actually shut down the customer service desk, close it off, and support those customer service colleagues to be proactive, to go and greet customers who looked like they had a problem or complaint. And this is actually quite a radical idea for this large incumbent retailer. They're highly operational. They don't necessarily like to do rapid experiments because it can affect customer satisfaction. It could affect revenue. It could affect sales. So what we did, we used our social capital. We had individuals who were in a team who were ex-store managers, And those ex-store managers knew people who were currently in store who they believed had an appetite to be able to run these experiments of closing down the customer service desk and actually supporting colleagues to be more proactive. So what we did, we found those innovators and early adopters to run these experiments. We found one area manager who in turn found 3 store managers who had an appetite to run this experiment. And it didn't succeed completely at the beginning, but because we had this safe to learn environment where these people had an appetite, we found things were successful in terms of revolutionizing customer experience or the customer service offering within the front of these stores. And with those successes, we were able to jump over that chasm and find other store managers who became the early majority for the innovations that we succeeded with in terms of customer satisfaction. So again, just a quick summary of what happened there. We knew we wanted to revolutionize the customer service experience. We had this idea of closing down the customer service desk to allow colleagues to be more proactive with coaching. We knew that as an operator, many store managers and area managers wouldn't have an appetite for it, but we had connections, we had social capital to identify a few people who had an appetite for this. We found success, and through stories that these store managers had, other store managers in the early majority then said, okay, we want a bit of this success as well. And actually came to this team, and we were able to scale the success across the whole store estate. So this is an example of entrepreneurs finding those people on the operational side to be able to scale early success and make it embedded within the organization. So again, this is the innovators, those entrepreneurs, allowing the operational side to adapt with early success, which once they've built it, they've nailed it. Now we're going to scale it across the whole store estate. So conclusion, we're coming to the end now. So what we've done this evening, we started off by having a look at Jack Welch's quote, the one where he says that if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. And we asked ourselves the question, how could organizations create the ability to rapidly respond to change? And we had a look at some of the realities of the gap between the entrepreneurial system and the operational system. And we also had a look at this phenomenon of pattern entrainment. And we also had a look at the Harvard Business Review studies where alignment isn't always a problem that we need to solve when we're trying to do innovation. We need to work cross silo. We need to be able to create these value streams which go horizontally across the organization. And then we had a look at 3 techniques that we can employ. One was handpicking those entrepreneurs from across the business, bring them together to create this entrepreneurial system. We had a look at organizing for innovation. So remember, we had to look at 4 organizational designs, and we discovered that the entrepreneurial, the ambidextrous system is the best one, where with there is a separate entrepreneurial system, but it's still getting the support from the management team. And finally, we had a look at integrating with the operational side of the business, those innovators, identifying those early adopters on the operational side before they can scale things. So again, in summary, what we want to do is shift organizational design where the operational system is stifling the emergence of the entrepreneurial side. And we want to be able to change that where you're creating an environment where those entrepreneurial individuals can actually help support the emergence of new opportunities for those on the operational side. So I'm going to open up for questions in a moment. Before we do that, just a reminder that all this information is available, all these references are available. There's also going to be a link to this slideware at the end if you want to go over this again. So other than that, I'm just going to pause there, and Corrado, perhaps we can allow people to unmute themselves and ask questions on what we've spoken about this evening.
Yeah, Dean, please, now it's Q&A session, so you can turn on your microphone and share your observation, or if you have some question to Dean. I would like to break the ice again, Dean. Just coming back to your analogy with the kayaking,
Mm.
that it's really interesting because I also use this analogy to explain a similar concept. I mean, the kayak in whitewater, that is the one that you have in your picture, is
Mm-hmm.
a kayak that by design, it's really easy to turn on. I mean, because they have to move in white water that is absolutely in movement, they need a tool. Let me call the kayak a tool that it can be easily turned on in different directions. Instead, probably there are also other kind of kayaking in quiet water that are for long distances and not in white water, but what is called blue water, okay, that is quiet water. And actually, these kayak are designed to go straight on. And if you want to make a turn with this kayak, it's absolutely impossible. I mean, this just to tell that by design, the how can we call the not the tool, I want to use these transport tools, are designed with different attributes because they are living in different situations. One is a very turbulent situation and the other is a very quiet situation. So this is exactly why you prefer in an operational system, let me say, the routine, predictability, and what else, because you are operating in a predictable situation. On the other side, instead, everything is changing every second, and so you cannot predict what is going to happen. Okay, so this is also as a lesson, following what you said, that maybe you have to design the organization to behave differently in different situations.
Mm. Absolutely.
But it's not a
Absolutely.
question. I mean, it's just a sharing of thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that ties into, we need both types of kayaks in an organization. We need, and this links into that notion of the ambidextrous organization. On the left hand or one side, we need the shorter kayaks where we can be a lot more nimble and be able to change and adapt quickly. And we need those kind of longer, more kind of wooden, open top kayaks who are more kind of straight lined and are able to kind of glide through the water in a more predictable and controlled manner, because we know the environment's appropriate for that. But we need both types of kayaks.
Yeah, and if I may jump in, this statement is exactly what I was thinking about when I saw the last slide you showed, Dean, when you showed the one arrow where the upper orange arrow was stifling the organizational operations, was stifling the innovation, and then the implicitly nicer green arrow that goes back, that was enabling innovation. And I was thinking, hey, but you still need both arrows in both directions, because in the end, this innovation is supposed to help the organization strive. And whether or not it wants to be more performing or grow or whatever, it has some goals, and that's what it needs, this entrepreneurial system. Not all entrepreneurial ventures seek to create a new business from scratch. Some of them want to introduce innovation. Some of these innovations are radical. Some of them are incremental. Some of them are about being more efficient, bigger, more powerful. Can give you a ton of examples from the military field. And so I was thinking, this orange arrow would have to be, how can I say, reframed into a governing slash supporting slash integrating force that seeks to optimally integrate these entrepreneurial forces that have some room to exist and to strive in the organization, integrate them back to help the organization, but not in a stifling way. Then that's a top-down alignment, classical fallacy about business IT alignment. And hey, how come we cannot produce new services? Well, because anything we do in IT is aligned to whatever was decided at the very top of the organization. And so therefore nothing new can emerge, because the sole focus we have in the organization is on whatever dashboards we have defined to keep doing the stuff we did before in a better way. And so I was thinking, these two arrows, they have to coexist. And so there will be a variety, I guess, luckily, I guess, also a variety of how these two arrows, this yin yang, if you want, of two forces will be instantiated. And just to close on metaphors, Corrado and you were using this kayaking. I also thought the same when I saw, hey, this kayak is designed for this kind of initiative. I was watching a science fiction movie last weekend on Amazon Prime. No advertisement, no pun intended. And this weird science fiction in a future world after humanity has destroyed itself, cities coexist in two fighting, let's say, contingents. Some of these cities are mobile, so they're eternally mobile, and so the megalithic city of London has crossed the channel and moved into Europe to conquer much smaller, much nimbler cities that are also mobile but much smaller and eat them. They literally eat them and eat their resources. And I was thinking, hey, by the way, the movie ends up in London destroying itself because it grew too big. But what I mean is, they in the movie, they over 2 hours, what they explained is that a company or a moving city grew too big and too slow to be able to eat other smaller cities, and it has been taken down by a confederation of much more mobile cities that created a whole new world. So I don't want to take it too far, but my conclusion is these two arrows, I guess, will have to coexist. I guess.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Thank you, and also for the tip for watching a sci-fi film this weekend.
I can send it.
I like what you said there, and I just want to pick up on one thing you said: the yin and yang. So the yin and yang, if you think about, it's like two different hemispheres: the white hemisphere and the dark hemisphere. The light hemisphere, we can conceive that as a place of order and calmness and regularity. So this could be the operational side of the business. If we think about the dark side of yin and yang, that could be the place of chaos and emergence and novelty. But what's really interesting about yin and yang, if we think about it, there's the opposite colors circle in each of the halves. So if we think about the calm white area, there's the darker circle and inside, and there's always going to be a sense of disruption and emergence and novelty, even when things are calm. And if you think about the dark half, the dark hemisphere, a place of chaos and emergence and novelty, in there's an emergence with the white circle of calmness. So if we think about that from an organizational point of view, we've got to be able to balance the two and know there's an emergent dynamic. Where there's calmness, there needs to be emergence. When there is disruption and chaos, there needs to be a sense of emergence. And it's kind of playing around those dynamics is a nice metaphor for how organizations need to be ambidextrous.
Ambidextrous, yeah. I wanted to give a concrete example of how this yin and yang forces exist in the field of DevOps, just to show you that none of this stuff is very abstract. People have been doing it. Maybe they don't realize, but maybe they do. But in the field of DevOps, failure by design is one of those principles that is to introduce resiliency in infrastructures is used very widely. And so to allow for infrastructure innovation, you introduce failures sometimes just to test the resiliency of your infrastructure. But what it does is it leads those teams that manage the infrastructure to find ways to deal with those failures. They shut down clusters randomly and see how the infrastructure reacts. And when it fails to react and still, let's say Netflix, fails.
Chaos Monkey.
Yeah, like Chaos Monkey is an example, red, black deployments. There is a ton of ways to introduce failure by design, but it leads those people, engineers, sometimes to collaborate internally. Sometimes they go outside and see, hey, what are the features that are really important? Amazon Prime solves it differently. They still deliver the movie, but in a much lower quality. Netflix has much more redundancy, I guess. I don't want to claim this is recorded, but my understanding is they have a different choice. They have to deliver at a certain quality, so HD. And so no matter what happens in the infrastructure, they will still find ways to deliver. So this leads teams to find local ways to improve, to innovate. It's a form of innovation, this improvement. And that was an example for what you said about the destructive force of the yin and yang. And it's not just theory. I mean, people are doing this stuff. That's my contribution.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else like to share a thought or ask a question?
You unmute, Corrado.
Yeah, sorry. Actually, this is happening also in the organization. I mean, there are some companies. I have in mind an insurance company that has a cluster of startup incubating in their own offices. And they are doing this just to, let me say, follow the growth of the startup and then later englobe into the larger company the outcomes coming from the startup. So this could be a sort of patterns that large companies can use to create this, I think we can call pocket of innovation into the companies that actually is not really an innovative company, because I know this company is not really innovative. And I see that other great, I mean, large companies are following similar approaches. I mean, there are different examples on the market, particularly in what is considered a really static market, such as finance, insurance, and what else.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, taking it up a scale higher than individual financial services company, if you think about in the UK, government supporting challenger banks and giving them a space to be entrepreneurial and grow. And that is actually driving innovation from, because it's challenging, it's beginning to undermine the existing big banks. So this can happen at a whole industry or sector level as well. And governments can actually catalyze and support the emergence of entrepreneurial startups and innovators to disrupt the market and just kind of send a shock into the system to allow those more incumbent organizations to actually respond. We've got a couple of minutes left before we need to close. Any other thoughts or questions?
Mortal Engine, yeah. By the way, I see the movie. I really didn't like it, just for your information. but however, I like the metaphor, the analogy. Thank you, Maru, for sharing.
I'm a nerd. I like I like sci-fi movies. Yeah, I wanted to say about the social network analysis component. There was a graph at some point that Dean used to illustrate. Yes, those topologies. So these give you a very nice way to abstract what's going on inside any organization. It doesn't have to be a company. It can be a sales team. It can be across enterprises. But these give you many abstractions on what's going on with flows of, let's say, information, cascading, action taking, etc. These are very useful tools to analyze how rigid and where are my bottlenecks in the organization. And you can use this to, there is no one-shot silver bullet method to use this as a tool, social network analysis, but it is an incredibly powerful tool to understand what's going on in my organization, what's going on with my teams, where do I have to intervene to allow for more flexibility, more flow, maybe talk to some people, maybe know if it's not a bottleneck, he's an information or a social concentrator, maybe this person has a lot more reach for me to introduce changes or innovations through. There is a ton of things that social network analysis allows for. Yeah, I wanted to contribute this to this thought. It's a.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that we can close this session. And if there are any more questions, but okay. Thank you, Dean, for sharing this. Yes, this is the link to the slides. Please, if you want to close the session, I will be happy to.
Thank you, Corrado and Ursula, for again creating this opportunity for all of us to come together and have a chat. And thank you all those who have come along, that have been patient, listened to me rabbit on for 90 minutes. And thank you for your contributions and playing along. I guess we didn't say the A word once. What's that, Corrado? What's in the camera? Applause. I was just saying that I'm quite pleased that no one said the A word once.
Yeah, that's actually interesting.
Oh,
it's interesting.
Mara mentioned Amazon at least a couple of times.
No, what I like it about this talk, Dean, is that we talk really about big systems. I mean, this was a very big topic actually. In let me say that we face in 1 hour and a half after job. I mean, with a lot of insights for larger companies that probably are the environment where we are working in. So I think it was really valuable for all of us to give a different view of what's happening in our companies, or what should happen. Let me say probably.
We are change agents. We are change makers. Let's get out there and start good conversations.
Agree. It's difficult to find, let me say, someone in the companies to talk about that, but you're right. We should find.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. This is not the last appointment of the year. Okay. We have another one next week. So I hope to see you there. Again, thanks, Dean, for sharing this. The recording session will be available, I don't know when. Probably after Christmas break, because probably I will do this in Christmas time. And thank you all for coming and joining. And thank you for making the conversation really rich and interesting as this talk is. Okay. Thank you. Have a great evening.
A round of applause for Dean. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Run.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care.